Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. I'm your host, Seth Coelen, founder of UX Cabin, where we create world-class web and mobile apps. I'm excited to bring you a behind-the-scenes look into the lives of some of the most interesting and talented people in product design. We'll get strategic advice on how they got to where they are today and things they wish they would have known earlier in their career. Welcome to the Product Design Podcast. Today we have Chris Shepard with us. He is the CEO and co-founder of the design tech startup Wisiwig. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Seth. I'm happy to be here. Very excited.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you like to do?
Yeah. So my name is Chris. I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, which is right next to Harvard and MIT. I've been in UX product design with several different titles, but really doing the same thing for over 10 years, all of which have been at enterprise B2B SaaS companies. So really not working on direct to consumer products like mobile apps and like Uber and Lyft, but more so focused on how to make our work lives better and easier and accomplish more. So it's been quite the journey. And then, just about a year ago, I transitioned from being a designer to being an entrepreneur. So like you said, I started a company, design tech startup called Wisiwig, and we've been building our product. We participated in a startup accelerator program the past year, and now we're trying to take it to the next level. So we're pretty excited about it.
Very nice. That's quite the product design UX pedigree there. So how did you even get started into UX?
Yeah, sure. I got into UX product design back in college. So this is like way more than 10 years ago. I studied I had a major, it was called industrial engineering, and not to be confused with industrial design, where with industrial design, you design physical products. Usually it's like furniture or some type of hardware. With industrial engineering, you're designing systems. So it's a little bit more abstract. Usually it's with a business or manufacturing facility to figure out how to reduce costs and optimize their operations. Typical applications for industrial engineering is like go into a hospital, for example, and how do you make the emergency room much more efficient? Or how do you make the whole like floor of a operating facility like much more efficient to get better quality results as well as a higher throughput of patients. So I studied industrial engineering, and I was actually doing design before I even realized what it was. I remember my junior year of college, I designed an app with a friend of mine. We were working on this class project, and just to give you a little bit of a taste of the type of work we studied in industrial engineering, it was an exercise app where we had to optimize the level of intensity of the workout, balance that with the amount of time you had to exercise, as well as the amount of calories you wanted to burn. So I really took the lead on like creating this algorithm and doing a lot of like research into like the fitness and calorie burning rates, which I had no idea what it was about. And then my friend who I was working on the project with could actually develop like a simple web application. And so he built the bones of it really from the ground up. And then I was there to kind of, not knowing what I was doing at the time, like, oh, you should make this button this color and move this here and that. And, we did really well in the project. It was a lot of fun. And it was just a neat toy to show our friends. And I'm like, hey, like, how lazy are you? Do you want to be super lazy? Well, you're going to need 4 hours to go for a walk in order to burn this amount of calories. So it was a pretty cool tool.
That is cool. So you kind of cut your teeth on design and UX and behavioral interaction without even really knowing it.
Right. Yeah. And then to take it a next step further, my senior capstone project it started off with like finding a way to optimize gas station deliveries for refueling all their tanks at the gas stations. So I actually partnered with the CEO of a regional gas station out in Amherst, Massachusetts. And so we figured out all the modeling behind like how to model the operations, which was a task in itself. Then at the end of it, we actually built another web application that had an Access database behind it, doing all the calculations. And then again, I found myself giving advice around how the UI should look and work. And so that was another kind of early experience of doing design, product design, without really realizing it. And so using both of those projects, it really helped me kind of land on my feet as a UX designer.
Wow. So did you get a UX design role right out of college?
I did. So there was a networking event for this company. It was an engineering software company based out of Massachusetts. And they were looking to hire 40 to 50 new graduates, really to try to get some fresh eyes on what they're doing. A lot of their employees at the time have been with the company for like over 20 years and starting to like retire or move on and things like that. So I went to this event simply because they were giving free pizza.
Wow.
And I also needed a job too. So that was definitely a motivator. But after getting my slice of pizza, listening to their talk, I went up to them and they had 4 open roles for what they called usability analysts. So, but trying to make their products easier to use. And I took a human factors engineering course that year too. And I was really interested in like looking at the world around you and trying to make things like easier to use, more delightful to use, more aesthetically pleasing to look at. So that was the role that I ended up applying for and landing on my feet as a UX designer.
Wow. Now, what year was this?
2012.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was kind of like, I feel like kind of right as UX was kind of becoming kind of mainstream in terms of like everyone realizing the need for it or wanting it, like at kind of a macro, business level.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was interesting time. I actually worked on the first web application for the company. So back then it was for the older companies that was maybe a little bit slower moving to change in their industry and how they do things. We were still shipping software through CDs.
Wow.
So it was desktop application, and a lot of the company, several of the designers even like worked on making the desktop applications better. But I was privileged and lucky enough to work on the very first HTML5 web-based application. And so I learned a lot about like web design, how to design an application within the browser versus like something that you just, double click on your desktop computer. So that was really interesting. I learned a lot and it was very exciting.
Yeah. I remember back around like 2012, 2013, working at an agency, working with a client that had the need to support IE7, and just like the amount of things we had to do back then to like comply with that. Cause like, just so many funny things. Like they wanted to use a very specific font that was within their branding. And we could, obviously get no web fonts other than default fonts to work on IE. So we literally had to create images of text and then save those into the landing page so that their font would appear. I'm like, no font is worth this. It was something like very like normal, just basically like to the naked eye looked like Arial, right?
Right.
We had all of these crazy things and like specific CSS hacks and having to rebuild something in a completely different way, like in a table-based layout, just because IE wouldn't like respect, and all those, wild west days of IE and CSS. And
all those problems sound extremely familiar for that time for me. Also, iPads started to become really popular, even in the workplace. So we had to support Safari and Chrome, and it was a nightmare. I think looking back on it, we could have learned a lot from like the MVP mindset of like, we're going to support one browser and we're going to do it really well, right?
Right.
And not try to support 3. And we're going to try to support one type of device, not several. But, it was a really great learning experience for everyone on the team. I got to work with people that have either been with the company or have been like in the software space for like 20 plus years. Here's me, like 22 years old, coming out of school, not I thought, I thought when I first got this job I thought I was just going to be doing usability tests. So talking to people,
Wow.
that's why I was very excited about it. And then the very first day I got a book dropped on my desk, and it was a web development book. It was about coding, and it scared me a lot. I was like, I did not sign up for this to code. But, I think throughout my journey there, it was in the beginning, it was a lot of like learning how to use Illustrator and Photoshop.
Yeah.
Just learn how to use the tools. Yes, how to conduct usability studies, but like that was a very small piece of it. It was more about like, how do you design something in the first place to get somebody to actually use it? And so learning software development, even from a very high level, was extremely important for me.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I kind of got into UX a little bit backwards way where
Right.
I got hired first as a front end developer. And I legitimately at that point, like in 2012, didn't know that there was anything that was distinguishing really front end from back end from design. I thought it was just like, basically you're just a web designer. And when you need to design, you open Photoshop and you do design. When you need to code, you hook things up and code it up. And then, slowly I started to see, oh, there's like actually like pretty defined roles emerging from here. And I'm like, I'm like good at CSS, but I'm not going to be like a programmer, right? Like I'm not, right. My ceiling's pretty low on that. So from that point started to really latch on and enjoy, design and UI and UX. But yeah, I feel like we kind of grew up in that same time frame where everything was kind of emerging and it was kind of the wild, wild west, which is cool to think back to.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that because, today front end development and design are very different and we work in very separate mediums. But back then it was like a lot of times you'd find people designing in code. And I knew a little bit of HTML, CSS and some JavaScript and would prototype really in the code. I would take our existing app and like modify it in the browser using the dev tools or like, spinning up a new branch or something. But, back then it was much more blended where design was really just about like how a product looks and works, right? And you can be a developer writing some code to do that, or you could be a designer drawing, using image-based tools to do that too. And today, front-end development with UI frameworks like React, Angular, and Vue, like front-end development is a lot more than just like where the components go and how everything looks. It's about like webhooks and API calls, and it's like it's become
super
like
involved.
Super involved thing.
Definitely. So yeah, I mean, that kind of, I know we'll get to it here in a little bit, but that kind of is a nice segue into, what you guys are trying to do at Wisiwig.
Yeah. So our mission at Wisiwig is to really kind of bring people back to the basics of designers being able to contribute and make an impact on the actual product. So what that's going to require is for designers to be more like technologists, right? Being able to be builders to some capacity. We're focused around the user interface. So, what we're trying to do is allow designers to, instead of handing off images, usually created in Figma or Sketch, but to be able to hand off code that actually makes it to the production environment. And so we're at the very early stages. We've only been around for 9 months now. We launched our MVP product only about 3 months ago. So it's been a very interesting journey so far. We've learned a lot about, even just from the small Chrome extension that we launched back in October. But, we're on this mission to really change the whole design industry to become more blended like that front-end developer.
Wow. That's really cool. And that's pretty ambitious. So, coming from a background of primarily B2B UX design, you're now kind of jumping into the deep end of, I don't even know if I would call it consumer, but it's design tooling for people contributing to UX and front end projects.
Right. I mean, I think we still are very much a B2B enterprise company. It just, the world of enterprise software looks quite different today than it used to, like, let's say 5 years ago, right? You have developers and designers and product managers and marketers, pretty much everyone is getting a lot of choice over what tools they use for their work. Back when, let's say 10 years ago, like Salesforce, for example, like the sales reps don't choose to use Salesforce. The VP of sales and the CEO sometimes like chooses that you use Salesforce because of like the business value that it can bring to the operations and the impact of sales at your company. But the world of B2B software looks very different. If you look at tools like Slack or even Figma, for example, it's like the VP of product didn't choose Figma. It's like their team of 5 to 10 designers all loved Figma and then advocated for it. And then that's how you get to an enterprise sales these days.
Or you have the situation where you have the approved tool that you have to use, and then everyone just kind of under the covers uses something else and then moves it to the other tool whenever they have to present.
People rebel. Yeah, secretly rebel. And then a year later, the company realizes nobody's using this tool that we purchased 100 license for.
Right.
What are you using? It's just like, oh, we've been using this thing and it's been free, but we've been limited. So now we want to pay for this. So we'll switch over.
Exactly. So yeah, what was kind of like your reasoning for wanting to branch out and build this?
I was observing. So at my last company, I was heading up the design team at a small ed tech startup. And I just couldn't help but see all of the problems and questions around the discrepancies between the designs, which are drawings, and the code, which is code. What's actually engineers are using to build and try to replicate our designs. We were revamping our design system at the time, which was a huge undertaking for both engineering as well as design. And we were using an out-of-the-box component library called Material UI, or MUI, I think it's called now. And so we got to a really good place with that. We very quickly, over course of a few months, like built out and designed in Sketch at the time, all these components. But we still had questions and discrepancies between what's in Sketch and what is in the code. And that created a lot of back and forth. That created a lot of friction between designers and developers of like, hey, like this doesn't look like this in the code. So we either change it and impact, the entire product for everywhere this component is used. And it's also going to require like probably a week or two extra in work to QA all this stuff too. Or we can just use what we have. And so that was like a small example of some of the problems that we were seeing like almost every week. And I just started to wonder, what if designers, instead of dragging and dropping and really changing the properties of the pictures of the components, what if we could actually have them use their actual components? Then you have alignment. Then you don't have two separate systems that you have to maintain. And also part of our mission is when you empower somebody with more capabilities, you need to be able to teach them how to use it and what's possible. So, it's got us really thinking about if designers could work with code and they could deliver code, even if it's just UI code to start, like the possibilities are endless there. You could start to introduce much more powerful capabilities. And that's kind of how people innovate. And I think designers today are restricted to be innovating within pictures and vector graphics. And so we want to allow them to innovate on real things, real products.
Cool. Very cool. That's quite an ambitious roadmap you guys have.
It is.
Thinking about, I know you guys are early and kind of releasing some early stage products and concepts, but give me like the full scale version, if everything goes right, how that will look from a, end-to-end process for design and development and really developing products.
Our vision is really to, I don't know how long this will take, but if a designer could look a lot more like a front-end developer. So going back to your early days of you design in one tool, you code in another, what if you could do everything in the same tool? And also you as the designer, the design or the engineer kind of combined has the ability to kind of do both, right? And that I think is going to really streamline our processes and our speed to delivery for the products that we design.
Wow. So yeah, I know that there's probably a lot of things that you guys have thought through a lot more deeply than I have, but thinking about kind of the workflow of that, would that kind of be like you pick a starting point with a framework and the framework kind of has all of the properties built into, the buttons and the inputs. You can drag that around and kind of influence it in an interface that's kind of like Figma. And then on the back end, it kind of changes everything that you could, it would replicate the appropriate properties according to the development framework, or how does that work?
Yeah, it's a little bit like that. I think it's really about segregating the front end and the UI piece from all the back end and the functionality. So we want to first tackle the UI, and then allowing whatever UI a designer comes up with, and many of which you just said is exactly what we're thinking. Like, you have some sort of framework or components. You're going to allow the designer or the design team even to figure out what properties that are customizable, which ones aren't. And then you're going to create your design system. And then you have this ability to drag and drop. And it might feel like a prototype at first because nothing's actually functioning, right? It's like you don't have a database hooked up. You don't have the right API calls connected yet. But you can start to kind of craft and see what the end result might look like. And then you can hand that off to a developer and say, hey, like, I need some data here. Or like, can you make this button work? And that's where the code comes into play. And that's where their skills come in being the most valuable, right? It's about writing the functionality, not moving the button over 10 pixels. So I think the back and forth is going to still happen, but it's going to be much more collaborative in the way that we're both working in the same medium. We both have a similar understanding of like what's needed here from a technology standpoint, how much effort things take. A lot of what we talk about today in design is like, to be a better collaborator with your engineer, it's like you need to estimate and understand how much effort your designs are required, right? And we all have deadlines and budgets, things like that. And I think working in a separate medium makes that very difficult for designers to do today.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your thought process to kind of build your own platform versus integrating with something, like a Sketch plugin or a Figma plugin that might be able to just be built on top of an existing tool.
Oh, we're totally working towards integrations with existing tools.
Cool.
But in order to do that, we needed some sort of platform app, right? So we started very basics where it's like, you can go to Wisiwig, our platform, and you can see all your saved designs. And, we integrated with the Chrome web browser, for example, as a Chrome extension. So, and then we also have integrations with GitHub. So, we're starting to test out like, where do we need to integrate to best support our user base? And also, what does that integration actually do? But we're definitely looking into integrating with things like Figma, Jira, and Slack, and other productivity tools that we use today.
Very cool. So, going out and making your own product is probably an exciting and scary thing. Walk me through your strategy to set yourself up to be able to take a swing like this.
I think the first thing, which was the hardest thing for us to do. So me and my co-founder, we're both product people, right? He's an engineer. I'm a designer. We lived and breathed product for 5 to 10 years, and in the very beginning stages of the company, we were really pushed hard by some great advisors we've been working with to forget about the product, figure out first what type of business you're building here. And if you were to build this product, are people even going to be willing to pay for it? Are people even going to be willing to use it, right? So I think there's a lot of market tests that you can do that doesn't involve a product that we had to learn about and build and test and analyze. And a lot of it was like building our website, talking to people, showing them some mock-ups in Figma that I did, or just really better understanding the problem space. And then also, how big of a problem is this? It was a big problem for me in the past, but it was just a big problem for everyone. So we had to really figure that pieces out first, which really helped us kind of be like, all right, we've been hearing some themes from talking to people. What's kind of aligned with our vision and where we want to go? what's the smallest sliver of that adds some value, doesn't have to be all the value that we hope to deliver on, and that we can build in like 2 months or under 2 months and test it and get some feedback and try to get some traction here. So that's kind of what we did. And Chrome extensions are, I don't know if you've ever built one yourself, but they're pretty easy to build relatively compared to like a full-blown product. So that was a big decision for us a big reason for us for choosing a Chrome extension. And then the target kind of use case that we first started out with was not design, but design QA. So with our Chrome extension, you can go to any website or web application, whether it's live in production or still in development, and you can actually visually modify the user interface. So you can take a button, you can change the color, you can change the text of the button, you can move the button to anywhere on the page. And so what this is doing for design QA is it's giving the designer the ability to go into an actual implementation that a developer really made and say, hey, like, here are the 10 things that should be changed with the implementation. And then not only that, we generate the code, CSS really, to make those changes. And then on top of all of that, you can share the design, as well as you can create a GitHub issue, like a ticket essentially, and literally throw it in the developer's face. So it's like, hey, here are the 10 things to fix. Here's everything you need. Here's the actual like changes, as well as some of the code to help you make these changes. Thank you very much.
Wow. So it gives them, like, say I went onto a page and I changed the color of 10 different things. You know, obviously that's generating a lot of different hex values. How would they receive that?
So you can do a couple of things. One is you share the design. We create a unique URL of every design that you make.
Okay.
So you can share the design. You can also share just the details of the design. So you can literally just share just the hex values. You can share just the code, just the CSS or the JSON that has all those values. Or you can create a GitHub issue where it's in the repo of where they're doing the changes anyways. So now you have kind of everything packaged there in the right place.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Cause like if I'm doing that today, there's like two ways I'm doing that. I'm either, if I'm not feeling nice, I just say buttons don't match, fix it. And they got to go figure out. If I'm feeling a little bit nicer, I might pull up a Loom and compare the design and the Figma next together and just, you know, say, hey, this should match this over here. And if I'm feeling really nice, maybe I'll take a screenshot and like put an arrow to a button and then say, this should be, you know, this hex value instead. So I guess the more complex and the more off, the more the code needs to be referenced to the specific elements, right?
Right.
I guess you could argue, though, that that's the designers then not allowing the developers to attune their attention to detail for the front end CSS.
Right. I mean, this is really just a test for us. Like we talked earlier about where we want to go.
Yeah.
And this is just a very small baby step in that direction. But we wanted to figure out, do designers want to actually like change and make an impact on the actual product design? Or are they more than happy with staying in Figma and having their developers kind of take control over that? And so it's really about an ownership problem of who wants to own this thing. And so we figured out pretty quickly, like, you know, we don't have all the features and bells and whistles that designers want, but there was a lot of responses we got from people who were like, wow, I can actually change things. And it feels like magical, right? It's like they could never do this sort of thing before unless they open up the browser dev tools to inspect and then to sift through all the HTML, CSS to make the changes that they want. And sometimes I would find myself doing that in past roles. And then I would take a screenshot and then I'd make annotations on the screenshot and share with the developer and contrasting the design and the implementation. So we're trying to like expedite that process and then take steps towards our bigger vision.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's another way that I would sometimes do things if I was feeling super nice. Just go into the inspector panel, you know, change the code or, you know, change the properties, copy that out, and then just be like, on this ID, change CSS to this.
So what we want to do essentially is make every designer their nicest, right?
Yeah, exactly. I love it. That's really cool. So you said the feedback's been pretty positive so far. How are you going about kind of prioritizing what product features you want to do next and solicit, and like who are you going to show this product to?
Yeah. So it's really about, this is the hardest part, I think, with building your own thing is you have to figure out not only what you have today and how to make it better in the short term, but not get too focused on that and not lose sight of the bigger picture here. Right. So it's a bit of, prioritizing like what we believe will make the most impact for the current experience. And have we heard this piece of feedback once? Or have we heard it several times? Are there some common themes here? So we're not jumping too quickly on making changes just because, a very avid early adopter is saying so. But we're trying to be, methodical. And a lot of it is just like, thank you for your feedback. Really appreciate it. We want to hear more of it because we need to hear more of it given how early we are. But I think for our bigger vision, which is where we're mostly focused on today, it's really about finding the key partners and going very deep with their design teams. So it's not just talking to one individual designer. It's really about like making partnerships and friends really with companies in this area. That's where we're starting, getting to know their design team and really getting to sit down with them and understand their day-to-day. What problems are they going through? What sparked interest in Wisiwig in the first place? And what's missing? Like, what do you need from us in order to go to that next level? So it's really about more depth than broadness right now. So we started with going broad, trying to get people and get some feedback, which is a great starting point. But now we're trying to pick a few and really go deeper.
Wow. So do you have plans then to at some point raise funding, or do you guys want to bootstrap this, or how do you see the monetary aspect of funding it come into play?
This type of business requires capital in order for us to grow quickly. And bootstrapping is very hard. And I respect every company that can figure out how to bootstrap and get anywhere close to $1 million in ARR. It's quite an achievement. I mean, but you hear success stories like MailChimp, for example, IPO'd and they bootstrapped. I believe GitHub also bootstrapped. But we believe in our mission and our vision, and the resources that's going to be required in order for us to execute on this is pretty significant. So we made the decision to go out and try to raise some money, which is what we're doing right now. So it's been very exciting, really great learning experience for both me and my co-founder on like what that entails. We're both first-time founders, so it's been a great learning process so far.
Yeah. What advice would you have to someone out there who is kind of toying around with the idea of starting their own product, going from something, steady and full-time role to the wild, wild west of starting their own product?
I would say anyone can start their own product, but I think there's a big difference between starting your own product versus starting your own business. I mean, as you probably know very well, it's like starting your own business. You can't just have the best product and think it's great. Other people need to think it's great and also at scale. And then how are you going to acquire those people? Now, a lot about business is marketing and sales, right? Which is things that you could be doing and testing before focusing on your product. So I think that's a really good starting point for anyone thinking about like working on their own thing. Is this a product or is this a business? And then depending on which one, like figuring out, is it possible? Is it feasible and achievable?
Yeah.
So if it's a product, it's just a project, and anyone can work on a project. So you can find some friends, make some new friends by networking, figure out what you need to build this thing. But transitioning that to a business is a whole another story.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. What have you guys learned in terms of, like, you kind of explained how you guys want to raise money. What were some of the things that you thought through in terms of, if we were to get funding, what would we use the money for? Or if we were to bootstrap, how would we go about it? What were your conversations and thoughts and strategies around that?
So yes to both those things. You need to first figure out what type of business you're building. And that also determines like how fast you're going to grow, how you're going to grow. So for example, if you need to bootstrap, or if you choose to try to bootstrap your company, you need to get to revenue very quickly, right? So a paid tier, and we've tested these things out, like how, our product today is free. It's a Chrome extension. It's a very small tool. How much effort would that take to get that thing to be paid? And, so figuring out those types of things, what's going to be required to actually get some revenue, how long is that going to take? And also, like, is that even worth it? Or should you do more focused on kind of the bigger vision, and your actual product for the future looks very different from what you built today. So that's kind of why I'm framing this as like, it's an MVP. We learned a lot from it, and that was the whole point. So we learned. And so, going back 6 months ago, we decided like we need to raise some money, and this is going to help us do that, but it's not going to help us bootstrap.
Nice. So you determine you need to raise funding, and let's say in someone's scenario, maybe this is exactly your scenario, you don't have a rich uncle or, connections to a VC. What's the first thing you do when you realize you need to raise funding?
I found out I needed to raise funding starting 3 weeks ago, meaning like pedal to the metal, like this is what you're doing for however long it'll take. So I'm in that exact situation. It's I don't have any rich relatives or very wealthy friends, but I think a good starting point for us was like, you go ask some of your family members and friends and kind of share with them the idea of like, you don't want their money as an investment, but you want their money as a gift to help support you. And so that's how I've been framing family and friends money from the very beginning. And so you might have some luck with that because, people love you and they want to see you succeed. And this is a way of doing that. But I would also say in terms of like networking and trying to reach investors, the most traction I've received from that is getting help from other founders who have done this already. So there's been several founders that, one of which I went to high school with and college. He's a year older than me. We haven't stayed in touch too much over the years, but he's a very successful CEO of a company in the Boston area. And him and his team have been helping me out a lot recently. There's been other founders throughout the Mass Challenge program that have really vouched for us and like helped us meet the right people. And so it's really about asking for help, and it's hard. It's not easy. That's why a lot of people aren't successful in raising money. So that's why you have to lean on others to help support you.
Yeah, no, I think the people have a few different ideas of like raising money or getting investment is, either you make it on Shark Tank, right? And,
right.
And that's a way, or it's like, you're just randomly like pitching VCs in, San Francisco, and like, no one really tells you all the work that you had to do to get to that point. Like, seems kind of inside ball, where it's like you need an introduction. I know probably these guys get emails all the time of ideas that are being pitched to them, and unless you have an introduction or some meaningful reason that they should pay attention to you, it's probably pretty hard to get in front of these guys for a shot.
Yeah, the cold outreach is very difficult to do. You have to expect a much lower success rate with that, but you still have to do that too, right? Because it only takes that one person to get back to you for you to form a good relationship, and then end up, leading your fundraising around it, and helping you grow your business even more in other ways too.
Yeah. Yeah. So, thinking about all of the things that you have on your plate, fundraising, product design, sales, marketing, are you working like 16 hours a day? What does a day in the life of Chris look like these days?
I think I'm going to say no to the 16 hours. I think my wife would disagree with that. It's been hard. It's been a big adjustment. I think going back to your question about before starting your own thing, what's something you should think about? I don't think you should ever stop thinking about like, is this the lifestyle that you want to have? And if not, what changes can you make in order to have a sustainable life, right? So it's been crazy, particularly in the last couple months with launching our product and now fundraising. But, I think it's definitely finding pockets of time to take care of yourself, take care of, your personal life, spend time with your friends and family. So definitely for me, I'm definitely not trying to deprioritize those things because those are extremely valuable to me, obviously, but it is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's always a good exercise to kind of think about what is success to you and what does that look like? Because success, some of the most quote unquote successful people I know, monetarily wise or position wise, can be some of the most miserable people And if you're thinking about it objectively, that's not really success, right? If you have a great business and a horrible life or what have you. And yeah, so I think, it's important to kind of think outside the traditional terms of success and say like, oh, well, maybe success for me means I can go on a walk with my kids in the middle of the day, or I can sleep in and I, don't have to be at work early, or I don't have to have a commute. Or maybe you are like super crazy driven and you want to change the world and work 16 hours a day and give up a lot of the social life and opportunities that way because you have certain goals you want to meet. But I think it's, for product designers, engineers, people starting businesses, I think it's really important to determine what you're going to be. Are you going to pursue kind of a lifestyle business? Are you going to, go the startup route and take investment where you probably need to hustle a bit more and make some trade-offs in your personal life, but really just, figuring out what success means to you personally and to your family, right?
Right. No, I totally agree with all of that. It's, from the very beginning, when I first met my co-founder, we had started to have conversations around what type of business do we want to build? And there's trade-offs with every type of business, whether it's money or lifestyle.
Yep.
So we had to really ask ourselves, and we're still asking ourselves today, do we want to build $1 billion company? Do we want to try and build a $100 million company? Do we want to try to build a $10 million company? Right. So it's like very different trade-offs with each of those decision points.
Yeah. I think that's always a tricky conversation as well, because if you ask the question, how much is enough? The answer is always just a little bit more, right? So it's like, at what point I guess this is more a philosophical exercise, whether you have a job or whether you are building something. It's like, again, going back to success, how much is enough? If you got to that point, would you be satisfied? Would you be happy? Would you be able to say, I accomplished my goal, or I am, fulfilled in this? And I think a lot of the time it's, the fun is in the journey, in chasing it, not necessarily getting to the mountain peak. Obviously that's the goal, but it's, the journey that it took to get there. Did you learn along the way? Did you meet people? Did you have meaningful impact along the way? And I think that's part of the key in, whether you're climbing the ladder in your job or switching jobs or, building something new.
Right. I mean, even for me, in the very beginning stages of Wisiwig, I kind of treated this as like going to get my business degree, my MBA. And at the very least, if this all fails and 3 months from today, like I'll at least have learned a lot and met a lot of great people, hearing their interesting stories. And I think that's kind of how I framed it from the beginning, and then 3 months after that, it's kind of like, oh, well, I'll get to learn about a whole bunch of new things and meet a whole bunch of new people and work on some very interesting problems. So it's been a great experience so far. I don't want to, going back to like, should you start your own thing? I don't want to discourage anyone from doing it. I just think it's an intentional decision, but it's also a very rewarding decision if you make the right choice.
Absolutely. So for any of our listeners who are tuning in and wondering how they might be able to help or, play with your product or provide you guys with, any help that you might need, what would be the best way for folks to help you?
Yeah. I mean, if people are interested in what we're doing and want to give our product a try, it's free to use. So, just go to wiziwig.co, WISIWIG. It stands for What I See is What I Get. And just sign up directly from our website. And after using a little bit of it, if you want to share your feedback, we'd love to hear it. You can join our Slack community, which is also accessible through the website, as well as there's a chat bubble there that has direct access to me and my team. So definitely want to hear your thoughts and feedback.
Cool. Well, Chris, this has been a super exciting episode. This is awesome to hear your vision, what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. Thank you so much for coming on the show, and I'll leave you with the last word.
Yeah, thank you, Seth. I really enjoy your podcast. Really great guests and stories that you've had on so far. So I really appreciate you letting me be a part of that.
Absolutely. All right, Chris, well, you have a great one. And until next time, we will sign off for today.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us today on the Product Design Podcast. If you enjoyed our conversation, be sure and go follow our guests. Let them know they did a great job and you learned a lot. More to come in the following weeks as we bring on new guests. Please hit that subscribe button so that you will get these podcasts and learn a ton about the product design community. Excited to see you next time. Thanks.